So in this learning objective, we're going to discuss the election of 1824 and show how it led to the development of today's Democratic Party. So the election of 1824 reflects the end of the era of good feeling, just the one political party rule of the nation's federal government had passed. By this time, the country had split very badly over three economic issues of what was called by Henry Clay the American system. So Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House. This individual right here, he was one of the eminent statesmen of his time. So Clay insisted that the only way the nation could be strengthened was on a sound economic program that would enable the United States to become independent of the rest of the world. And the system had three parts, right? And so he's trying to lay out a plan to make us economically independent from the rest of the world. The first was the National Bank, which was to provide a sound, uniform financial system. And so in 1811, the first Bank of the United States, its charter is going to expire. Madison, a Democratic Republican, was against the bank and would not renew it in its charter. But between 1811 and 1816, the number of state banks tripled. These banks had no government checks on them. So under these circumstances, many of the state banks went wild in issuing banknotes, $28 million in 1811 and $68 million in 1816. So in other words, there's too much money floating around within the economy. It's creating a lot of instability and a lot of inflation within the economy. So the instability in the economy made Democratic Republicans and businessmen alike aware of the need for a national bank to stabilize the American currency. So a bill was signed into law by President Madison in 1816, which created the second bank of the United States. And the function and the structure of the second bank were essentially the same as those of the first bank. The second leg of the American system was the protective tariff. When the Republicans, the Democratic Republicans, adopted the protective tariff of 1816, they adopted another one of Hamilton's and the Federalist Party's ideas. The reasons for this were that during the early 1800s, with Jefferson's embargo plus the War of 1812, the United States found it difficult to get goods from Europe. This problem stimulated the Industrial Revolution in the United States, or the market revolution within the United States. So after the war, the British merchants wanted to recapture their one-time American trade. So in 1850, the British dumped a lot of low-cost goods on American markets in hopes of running their American competition out of business. So they're just flooding the market with British goods in 1815. American businessmen were not about to be driven out of business. So in 1816, they put pressure on Congress to pass a protective tariff to protect their interests. The Tariff Act had the support of both John C. Calhoun, so that name's going to keep coming up, so take note of his name, from the South, and Henry Clay from the West, and put import duties of 15% to 30% on cotton, textiles, leather, paper, pig iron, wool, and other goods that mostly benefited the North. So again, the idea here is to create an economy, an American economy that is not dependent on foreign markets. And the other leg of the American system is the infrastructure. So the final phase of the American system is laid out by Henry Clay, again, this gentleman right here, was for internal improvements for transportation. So the The Embargo Act of 1807 and the War of 1812 disrupted coastal shipping and demonstrated the inadequacy of the country's internal transportation system for both interstate commerce and national defense. In the West, high transportation costs still deprived many farmers of outside markets and tied them to an economy of pioneer self-sufficiency. The greatest demand for federal help came from the West, because basically they were cut off from the rest of the markets in the South and in the North, and from foreign markets as well, due to poor infrastructure. So in 1817, John C. Calhoun proposed the Bonus Bill, which provided that $1.5 million be distributed among the states for local internal improvements. Madison considered the bill unconstitutional, and he vetoed it in March, just before he left office. So this killed the internal improvement phase of the American system and left such improvements up to state governments and private enterprise. As a result of these issues, though, there were 4 candidates in 1824 for the presidency. All were claiming to be Democratic Republicans. So we have Andrew Jackson from the West. We have John Quincy Adams from the North right here. And we have William H. Crawford from the South. And then we have Henry Clay, who is going to claim that he represents national interests with his pitch on the American system. So Henry Clay was the 4th candidate, and he thought of himself as this national candidate representing the interest of all 3 sections of the country with his American system. Again, the bank, a protective tariff, and the need for developing infrastructure, all to be laid out by the federal government to protect not just sectional interests, but national interests. So there was a possibility of 261 electoral votes, and 131 were necessary for victory. So what ends up happening in this election is Clay gets 37, Crawford gets 41 electoral votes, Adams gets 84, and Jackson gets 99. So Jackson clearly wins the popular and the electoral vote here, but he doesn't have the necessary 131 for a clear victory, due to the fact that he had 4 candidates that kind of split the difference on this in this election. So this election is really awkward. Since there's not a clear winner, it goes to the House of Representatives. And who is the Speaker of the House? Why, it's this guy, a presidential candidate right here, Henry Clay, right? And so this guy right here, who was running for office, is going to have the ability to lobby due to his leadership of the House, is going to have the ability to lobby the House in order for the House to select the next president of the United States. Well, he's not going to lobby for himself. That would look bad, obviously, politically. And 2, he came in 4th place, so it would really look awkward for him doing that. So he's going to pitch his support for John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, the 2nd president. And then what Adams does that makes this election even more awkward is he responds by making Henry Clay the Secretary of State. So Jackson right here feels that this election was stolen from him. And Jackson's going to describe this as a corrupt bargain. So the charge represents a half-truth, as both Clay and Adams acted in what they felt was politically best for the party, the Democratic Republican Party, and the country, as their political views were very close. However, Clay did see the post of the Secretary of State as a stepping stone for maybe a future president campaign that he can get into. Clay opposed the election to the presidency of a military leader like Jackson because he doubted that losing only 71 casualties and killing 25 Englishmen at New Orleans did not qualify a man for presidency. To complement this, the Secretary of Statesmanship went to Clay, according to Adams, quote, an appointment due to Mr. Clay's talents and services. It was politicians who elected John Quincy Adams, not the people. So as feeling like he was robbed of his victory, Jackson, he resigns from Congress in 1825 and began a 3-year campaign to win the presidency of 1828. During this 3-year time period, Jackson formulated what would be called a grassroots method of campaigning, as he would set up campaign offices all over the country, and he formed new political party called the Democratic Republican Party. Later, the term was shortened just to the Democratic Party. So, and in doing so, he's going to change the nature of campaigning itself. Right? He is going to be campaigning mainly on behalf of himself rather than allowing other people to campaign on behalf for him, as it was done prior to this election. And so we're going by 1828, we have this new party called the Democratic Party coming into effect. And so we'll take a look at what happens with that in Learning Objective 5.